which we pretty much just got through, is the experiences these people have. Meaning, regardless of what you think about the topic, and regardless of what preconceived notions you have had in the past about this, it's a really, really difficult thing. There's nothing wrong, halachically speaking, with saying, hey, there's some people who have a really difficult challenge. Even if I don't have it, I appreciate that there is a lot of dissonance. There's a certain cognitive dissonance between where they were told they should be and what they grew up believing they should be and where they are now. It's not easy. They want to make the point, and I think it's a very valid point, that this doesn't mean they hate the Torah, this doesn't mean they reject all the other mitzvot. In fact, it could well be there's only one mitzvah that's really hard for them, and the rest of them, you'll see a little bit later in the second half, that some of these people really do consider themselves Orthodox. They're bothered by other things. They don't necessarily fit into secular gay society, for example. You'll see that later on. But that's the point. The point is not to give an answer to a question. You'll see that there's more rabbinic discussion in the second half too. It's not to say this is okay. It's not to legitimize and say, we accept this. What exactly is forbidden? What's permissible? That was an interesting discussion with Mr. Ashkenazi. Leave it to the Sephardi guy to be the star of the show. But he tries to get into the technical details of saying, look, maybe having the inclination is one thing, maybe acting on it the way the Torah describes it's forbidden is something else. What about the middle ground? All right, that's a little bit technical. We'll talk about some of this, but the idea is, first of all, there's a tremendous struggle for these people. That this is an area of life that I think most of us don't. Maybe some of us do. Most of us don't really struggle with. It's not a normative kind of struggle. And it gets very little discussion in the Orthodox community. So in terms of the discussion, absolutely. No one talked about these things when I was little. It's not a million years ago, but we didn't have discussions about this in school. They like the very beginnings of sexual education were kind of in the Orthodox community, the 80s, 90s, whatever, when I was growing up and in school. And the question is, how competently do we deal with these things? How much should we discuss this? You'll see that some of the opinions are not really in favor of discussing it in public. Meaning, if it's a private problem that you have, you go discuss privately with someone. But then what do you do if there's nowhere to go? Naomi Marx was making the point, and that the Israeli Haredi girl from Beit Yaakov was saying the same thing, that she had a friend who knew her parents wouldn't accept it. She didn't think she could bring this up with anybody. She just killed herself because she figured, what's the point? So there's an aspect maybe of pikuach nefesh, like if people are so depressed and they're going to kill themselves because they don't know where to go or what their life is worth if they can't do this, is the next question. It's really interesting. You're going to see Chabad, you're going to see a little bit more from Rabbi Riskin. I don't know if something happened with him recently, I didn't hear. But
no,
I always thought Rabbi Riskin had tendencies because his
he's
voice was so high-pitched. He almost sounded like a woman.
I think society presumes that anyone with compassion is gay.
I don't know about you, Rabbi Riskin is one, I would know the worst rabbi ever.
What?
Rabbi
Shlomo Riskin.
What's so bad about him?
He screams, he screams at the audience.
Not from
Okay, I met him before, I think only once, maybe twice. I haven't heard.
He's a very high.
Nothing related to the
This topic. Okay.
To this topic.
He was the rabbi at Lincoln Square.
Yeah, I know.
And he used to talk a lot about Eretz Yisrael. And then one day he got, some of his congregants challenged him. You talk about Eretz Yisrael so much, why did you make Aliyah? And he was very successful there. And he said,
he's in front. He's rabbi in front.
Yeah, of course. He said,
so that's the one I was thinking about. Okay.
Oh,
he was almost fired because he had positions that people didn't like.
To be, I don't know.
Yeah, he was
almost
fired.
Not renewed. They didn't renew
They didn't renew his contract.
Which doesn't mean that he's right or wrong.
No.
I never liked him.
So so that's the one I was thinking about.
So what happened was that he said, you're right, I will make Aliyah. If we can find 200 families that are coming with me, I'm going. He wanted to go, but he didn't want to leave the community. And 200 families signed up.
Wow.
Every family put down, I think, $10,000.
Wow.
That's how they basically built most of Efrat, which was nothing before he got there.
Wow.
He told us the story, 5 or 5, 7, 8, not more than 8 families backed out in the end, but they left the money there. And that's how they moved. And he built
I
Yeshivat
was in
HaMivtah.
Efrat 10 years ago and I never even saw him.
He teaches.
He was never there.
I don't know. I don't know. Probably he travels and he speaks. Anyway, he has gout. I know that he doesn't travel as much as he used to. But I heard him speak for quite a while. He was very
We
interesting.
do the same, a couple of people will come.
Huh?
Do the same, people will come.
No, yeah. Tell people that we're going. We have a lot of people waiting for us there.
Well, if we could find 200,
I just think that's fun.
To
Very,
have the
very
family,
interesting,
other
yeah.
people.
200?
So
We also have to have 200 jobs.
right.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, maybe we'll bring Siyah Position with us. It'd be great if I could go and then get into fights with people and have my contract not renewed. That would be the ultimate goal of the Aliyah. But I mean, so very interesting. The different approaches. He, by the way, probably has the approach that I think is the most consistent with mine. In other words, Rabbi Riskin, when he talks about it, he says, listen, you'll see that in next week's segment where he says, you can say everything you want about, homosexuals until you meet one, and you see someone who really prays with kavanah, and who really struggles with it, and then you think very differently about it. Like you might have thought, like you saw the Hasidim in the beginning, I mean, leave it to like the Satmar Hasidim to do things in an offensive way. All these people are immoral, all these people are crazy. Well, I mean, that's easy for you to say. When you actually know someone who has this problem and who's fighting it and struggling with it, you look at it differently. That's not to say I, undo mitzvot in the Torah and I replace them with the ones that I like. Just it's much more difficult to judge, and it's much easier to judge somebody from a distance when you actually know something. It's much more complicated.
I want to say, not about Orthodox people who are gay, but before I became more religious, I used to do catering. I used to be involved in like modern dance, jazz ballet, and stuff like that, like a long time ago.
Sure.
And a lot of the guys were gay, but they weren't Jewish.
In dance.
They weren't Jewish.
It's almost as bad as fashion.
in dance, and also in
You
theater.
did.
They're like
Putting
almost
the-
exclusively gay.
It's actually bad, it's worse, right?
Dance
Yeah.
is worse
And,
than I'm
and
just
they,
checking.
what I want to say about it was, and I'm not talking about the people in the film, I'm not talking about people who struggle with, these are people who are like way out there gay. The whole lifestyle is so degenerate. It's like they don't, I mean, this was after a number of years of being in dance, and then I like stopped being in dance, but their whole lifestyle is just so like whatever you feel, you do whatever you feel.
Right, so there's a couple of things, there's some interesting statistics to consider. Number one is so I have a somewhat distant relative who's very flamboyantly gay. I met him once or twice in my life, but happened once when I was in Israel. His father wanted him to come visit me when I was in yeshiva, and he was out there on some kind of art scholarship or something.
Yeah.
So somewhere between fashion, music, dance, and art, I guess we'll find certain concentration. So what he told me, bizarrely enough, he said a few things. Number one is that he said that he believes this to be a pretty universally accepted fact, that the percentage of gay children in Jewish community is a little bit higher than it is outside. May or may not be the case.
What?
I don't know.
No.
He claims
Not
this
after
to
what
be-
I saw.
I mean, in secular society, I don't think in Orthodoxy, but among secular Jews, apparently it's much more prevalent. He also said that the way they say about themselves, and he included himself in the generalization, was that the gays have higher statistics all around. So he said, for example, more of them tend to go for higher education, or for masters or doctorates. They tend to have higher annual mean income, and they tend to have higher rates of depression, drug abuse, alcoholism, and suicide. And basically,
What was he basing all this on?
I guess I'm sure there's psychological studies that account for people's
I'm
orientation.
just talking about
But
my
it wasn't
experience.
a very flattering.
I'm
stat,
telling you,
but-
it was like really disgusting.
So one of the things that we need to address, and I'll be the first one to say it, is that might be true for some people. I know some heterosexual people who live a pretty crazy lifestyle too.
Not like,
I mean,
I
but
don't even want to go into details.
No, no.
This was told
But
to
it's just
me
that-
by people that I was friendly with.
right,
that
the
were gay.
generalization is really dangerous because there are
It's
people.
not a generalization.
There are people who live otherwise quiet and subtle and discreet lives, and might struggle with the same tendencies. It's easy for us to discuss and focus on the more flamboyant types. I'm not suggesting there aren't
I
any,
was
I'm
in
just saying-
dance for 10 years, both in Canada and in the States. And especially in the States, I'm talking about excesses, the kind of excesses that people that I was friends with, because I was friends, some of the people that I was working with and studying with and everything who were gay were very, very funny. They had fantastic senses of humor, better than everybody I know. But some of the stories that they told me about the lifestyle was so excessively out there, it
Right.
was like horrifying.
So some of it might have to do, as well as the drug use and the alcohol abuse, that this is a gay guy telling me that he understands this is the norm, is there's a lot of depression in the community. Regardless of how secular or religious you are,
Mhm.
you realize that your lifestyle isn't normative, meaning if the American Psychological Association recognizes this today, I think in the late 80s, early 90s, they changed their view, they recognize it as a variant. It's not a deviant lifestyle, it's not a perversion of the norm, it's just an alternative to the norm, an alternative lifestyle. So if you're living a lifestyle that, regardless of what people tell you in universities or on the radio, I mean, you know that most people aren't like this, it puts a lot of pressure on you.
Mhm.
By the way, l'havdil alf alf, but in a strange way, I mean, being an Orthodox Jew in a world that is not very tolerant of religion at all, so much more so of Jews and Jewish religion, you're putting yourself out there. So there are certain peculiarities to Jewish religion. Let me give you as an interesting example, because you mentioned the sense of humor. Think Woody Allen, Jerry Seinfeld, Jackie Mason to a certain extent. A lot of the very famous American comedians were Jewish,
Mhm.
especially the early ones, even to this day. And a lot of them became famous for their neuroses. They're very neurotic, very nervous types, and what they do with their humor is they try to take their nervous, obsessive, compulsive perspective on life and make something funny out of it. Jerry Seinfeld is a really weird guy. He's hysterical, but he's a strange guy. He once said about himself that he thinks he's autistic. He's like, he said his social interactions with people are very bizarre and
I
very...
find that his humor
unusual.
not that crazy.
Well, it's observationist humor. You notice something small, you make it something big, just like the stereotypical Jewish mother. And you know, people are always scrutinizing you because you're Jewish and you're different, so you get used to scrutinizing things that you see, and it just, you know, as a minority, as someone who's different enough and in some ways visibly different enough to invite certain scrutiny or to live with certain pressures, it becomes difficult to bear. You're talking about something that you can't change. So if I don't want to be Jewish anymore, I can stop being observant. This is something that we'll discuss this, whether or not you can change it, but most people are of the mind that you can't. And that right away, that guy Mark, you saw that he broke down and started crying, where basically he was saying, you know, I always dreamt of having a family. At some point I realized that wasn't really going to happen.
The one who played the piano?
Yeah, the guy who was from Chicago and moved to LA, which is a very strange place for him to move. So he basically says, it took a while before it hit me, where all of a sudden things that I imagined from a very young age I was going to have when I grow up, and I'm realizing now that it's not going to happen that way. So he can't change it. He tried his darndest, according to his account. He tried everything. You're going to see it's actually a really difficult interaction he has with a Chabad rabbi in the next segment. And basically he's telling you, I tried everything I can't change this. And now you realize that you feel condemned, you know, to struggle like this for the rest of your life. Which is why people sometimes commit suicide, because you think that the suffering is going to go on forever. It's only going to get worse. It's only going to become more noticeable.
But society accepts it much more. They even like legalize it.
Today it does. Today it does. 15 years ago, probably less. 30 years ago, definitely a lot less. So there are certain pressures there. And look, what's our job as Jews and as human beings? Is it to add pressure to people who are already suffering from it? Is there anything we can do to help? Is it possible to help without justifying and normalizing and you know, I mean, what is it that we're accepting? That's the real question. Because they're going to make the point, you'll see it a little bit more clearly in the next half, that everyone struggles with something. We all have our joys and challenges. How come this one is so abominable compared to others? So for example, the Torah is not very flattering of adultery, yet it happens all the time, involving very famous, prominent, well-known celebrities, politicians, etc. And for some reason it's not that weird to us. So he was married, so she was married, what's the big deal? You know, everyone does it. So there, because it's an inclination that most normal people have, and they're just, you know, it went out of bounds in terms of, you know, you're married, you're supposed to respect that. We find it bizarre, but not really bizarre. Whereas someone, like two consenting adults who engage in a homosexual relationship, you say, that's weird. That shouldn't be allowed to happen, you know. And the question is it really that much worse than some of the other things that we consider normal and that we let pass and that we don't say anything about? Are we a little bit hypocritical in the way that we handle it? I'm not suggesting it's okay, let them do whatever they want, or, I mean, I don't think that's the response to anything. But maybe it is much easier for us to condemn this than it is to condemn other things that are probably as damaging or potentially even more. At the same time, do I subscribe to the secular, societies, just do whatever you want and that's legitimate, it's perfect, it's fine, we'll give you a stamp of approval, also not. But that's what you're going to see. You're going to see that they get more support from atheist secularists than they do get from the religious community. And then what you're telling them is take your homosexuality to where, and with it you can take your kashrut, your Shabbat, stop praying like we don't want anything from you. And if I can keep 610 mitzvot or 612, is the rest really worth flushing down the toilet just because of this, particular, it's not insignificant, but it's a very, challenging.
You'd rather take care of 612 and not this one, even if it's a big one.
I mean, is that what we say? Am I condoning the rejection of even one mitzvah in the Torah? No, God forbid. I would never suggest such a thing. Am I suggesting that we all keep all the mitzvot all the time, and that's why we're perfect? And
We're not rejecting people who are not Shabbat observants, for example.
We shouldn't be rejecting anything. We should be rejecting the normalization of the rejection of the mitzvot. But these aren't people who are telling you, I reject the mitzvah per se. A few of them, yes. That guy Stephen Goldberg, and he calls himself Orthodox. Very bizarre. But the rest of them aren't telling you we reject the Torah. On the contrary, you see that they struggle. They want to keep the Torah. They want to keep the rest of the mitzvot. This one mitzvah is a little bit hard for them. Guess what? There are mitzvot that are hard for me too. Does that mean I should stop trying all of them? That one or the rest of them? Or, what does it mean for me? And guess what? You're going to have kids with God's help. I mean, if you think that you can tell your kids, hey, if you blew this mitzvah, the rest of your spirituality is worthless. That's a very heavy condemnation. So just we'll watch with an open mind. That was really bizarre. That those two women came. Like we should have paused. And maybe I would have explained to them what it is that we're watching. Right. Yeah. Maybe I don't know. I feel bad that it came out that way.
Well, why did they come so late? Isn't it really late?
It's almost 10 at this point.
Yeah. So right. We'll just put a bookmark in for today. Maybe they'll come back next week. Maybe they won't. But we'll continue the discussion and the